Howdy, my totally tubular gamers. We're not back with a short or a live stream. No, it's a video. Let's get to it right now. Come on.
So today we got another good old ranking video, and it's finally time we talk about Pac-Man. It has been quite some time since I've talked about the pack, several years actually, and I'm changing that today. And that's because on this very day, I'm going to be ranking every modern Pac-Man game from worst to best. Now Pac-Man, he doesn't really need much of an introduction. He's been around the block for a little bit, and he's had plenty of video games. He's been around for over 40 years now, almost longer than I've been hating on TGI Fridays. So yeah, there's been plenty of Pac-Man games, but like I mentioned, we're looking at the modern Pac-Man games today, and you might be going, okay, what are the modern Pac-Man games? Well, that's any new Pac-Man game released from the last 10 years or so. Of course, if you'd like me to look at literally every, and I mean every single Pac-Man game ever made, you can let me know down below, but that's not going to be today's video. And as per usual, I'm going to be ranking these games from worst to best, giving each one of them a little review, stacking them up against each other, seeing how things shake out, comparing, contrasting, and just giving my general thoughts. As I'm sure you all know by this point, I am a little bit of a rambler, so start the car up, start going to bed, get the Wendy's spicy nuggets or the popcorn or the beef jerky, set me to 1.5 speed, add me to the watch later playlist, however you're going to watch or listen to this video, we might be here a minute. And if you're not familiar with me, well, I'm Totally Tubular Jonathan, nice to meet you, I hope you're having a totally tubular day. If you enjoy this video, I'd love if you could like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff, I really do appreciate it all. Seriously, all the support is greatly appreciated. So, without further ado, let's get to the games. What is the worst of the modern Pac-Man games? Well, here we have Pac-Man 99, and you might be going, really? Pac-Man 99 is the weakest of the modern Pac-Man games? Well, let me explain. The game was released in 2021, however, it was discontinued and delisted in 2023 unless you bought the Unlock DLC, meaning that if you didn't buy that, yeah, there's just no way for you to play this, and even if you did buy that DLC, you can only play offline, which low-key defeats the purpose of the entire game. And because this game was only released for the Switch, there's not any fan servers or at least anything of the sort, at least to my understanding. And that's a real shame because this game in its prime was actually pretty great, and if it still went online, it would be way higher on this list. It was just total chaos, and it was actually a lot of fun. I never really got into Tetris 99, but Pac-Man 99, ooh, this one was always enjoyable. But unfortunately, these mega corporations do not want us to have fun, they do want us to eat TGI Fridays, and they took the game from us. Maybe one day it can come back or get recreated in some shape or form. I'd love for that. I don't like seeing any game lost to time, and this one, it just makes me sad. So from a discontinued game to a soon-to-be discontinued game, we have Pac-Man Mega Tunnel Battle, initially releasing for the Google Stadia in 2020, but eventually was re-released on everything else in 2024. Now, I remember when this game came out, and I was like, wow, it's getting its own little Pac-Man game, and it's developed by Heavy Iron Studios, the people who made SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom. And then Google Stadia got shut down, and I went, well, that's a shame. Only for Bandai Namco to actually bring the game back 4 years later with the subtitle Chomp Champs, and I was like, you know, that's pretty cool, they're giving it a second lease on life. Until Bandai Namco recently announced that this game was once again getting delisted and shut down, actually relatively soon as well. So yes, while you can buy and play this game as I'm recording this video, that's going to change pretty soon, and because of that, yeah, it's going towards the very bottom of the list. So you might be going, what even was this game? Well, it's actually a Battle Royale maze game that is essentially Pac-Man, but up to 64 players. This actually isn't the first time the Pac-Man series has attempted something like this, and like the other attempts, there actually is some fun to be had here. While you start in your own little maze, eventually you start merging with the other Pac-Men, and you can actually eat them up with a power pellet like they're ghosts or something, but they can do the same to you, and it can get actually rather chaotic. It can even go into a frenzy towards the end of each game. It's got some nice 3D graphics, it's got all the Pac-Man bleeps, bloops, and noises you want. And all in all, there's actually a surprisingly fun battle royale here, but it's getting shut down, you won't be able to play online, and without that, yeah, this game is pretty much worthless. Like I said, for Pac-Man 99, I don't like seeing any game get delisted, but this one stings a little extra. Not only did it get delisted once, it's actually been delisted twice. How many other games has that happened to? It can't be many. But either way, we're left with vaporware, so time to move on. So here we have a Pac-Man game that's certainly been forgotten about, that being Pac-Man 256. It initially released for iOS and Android in 2015, but it eventually came to consoles and PC in 2016. And it's certainly one of the stranger Pac-Man games to come out over the last 10 years. If you don't understand what the 256 in the title means, it's actually a reference to Pac-Man's infamous level 256 glitch, where if you got to the 256 level in the original Pac-Man, the game would just shit out and would just become a glitchy mess, and this game absolutely pokes fun at that. The game is actually an endless runner, seeing Pac-Man in his most classic form trying to get away from this glitchy mess that is constantly coming after him, along with, of course, the ghosts. And so it really sees you endlessly going through mazes, collecting Pac dots, trying to avoid the ghosts, and of course not having the glitch catch up to you. There's Pac dots, there's power pellets, there's fruits, and there's even a few other power-ups such as lasers, tornadoes, and clones to attack the ghosts. But all things considered, this is a pretty basic endless runner. I mean, the game was originally a mobile game. It was developed by Hipster Whale, who also developed Crossy Road, and this game honestly just feels like a mix of Crossy Road and Pac-Man. But you know what? It's not actually terrible. There is a little bit of fun to be had here. I'm not going to act like it's the most addicting endless runner, and there's plenty of better Pac-Man games that you could go play, but you know what? This one isn't delisted, and it surprisingly isn't grindy as hell, especially considering that it originally was a mobile game. It's got a charming aesthetic and at least a few minutes of fun. Funny enough, it's even included in the compilation titled Pac-Man Museum Plus, so if you ever get that compilation, you can try this. And it's certainly not the worst thing. Far from TGI Fridays, actually. And so here we have Pac-Man Championship Edition 2, releasing initially in 2016. So this is the follow-up to Pac-Man Championship Edition and Dejct Plus, both of which are some of the most beloved Pac-Man games ever made. And so naturally, when they announced Championship Edition 2, I was actually kinda hyped. I even pre-ordered it. I played it on release and was thoroughly whelmed. I wasn't disappointed, but I wasn't blown away either. And here we are like a decade later, and that feeling still resonates inside me. It's certainly not a bad game, but I wasn't blown away by it either, and I do think the Championship Edition DX is better. But we're not talking about Champ DX, we're talking about Champ 2. So let's get into it. When it comes to the structure, pretty similar to the first one, where you choose a maze, aesthetic, music, etc., and it's essentially Pac-Man but on steroids, where you're still trying to complete the maze, you're still trying to collect all of the Pac dots, but there are ghosts everywhere. Hundreds, if not dozens of ghosts are in these maps, and Pac-Man's gonna want to eat them all. You're gonna want to collect all of the Pac dots, get the power pellet, and then eat, gobble, 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 munch, 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 comer, comer, comer. See, I actually do know a bit of Spanish. You're gonna be eating a lot of these ghosts, and once you eat a bunch of them, you can actually leave the maze and move on to the next one. And it's pretty seamless. I actually think it's a pretty cool transition as well. I know a lot of people don't care for this game's aesthetic and vibe, but I actually fuck with it. I think it's pleasing on the eye, and it provides something visually different from most Pac-Man games, even if it does look at times a little on the cheap side. And the music's no slouch here either. Now, when it comes to what game modes this game offers, it has two. It has Score Attack, in which you're just trying to get the highest score possible, going from maze to maze to maze, and then it has Adventure, where you actually have to clear these objectives. Like the first game, the most fun I've had is the Score Attack, just trying to get the high score and moving from maze to maze. It can actually get rather satisfying. The Adventure mode's alright. Not all of the objectives are winners, but there are some fun ones in here, and it provides a little bit of variety. It also mixes up the gameplay in ways that you might not expect from a Pac-Man game. There's even bosses, which I did not expect, and these, they're just okay. When it comes to the overall gameplay, while it does have its satisfying elements and great parts to it, it just doesn't come together the same way that Championship DX does. It's nowhere near as satisfying, the controls are not as tight, and the game's physics, along with the general feel, just don't feel anywhere near as fine-tuned as DX. I also didn't think it was as replayable as DX, and at this point you're probably like, why don't you just go back to DX? Yeah, I think I actually will go back to DX. DX was just kinda goated. I would have included it on this list, but it came out like 15 years ago. Kinda hard to say it's a modern Pac-Man game, but low-key it's better than just about every game on this list. But anyway, Pac-Man Championship Edition 2 is a fine Pac-Man game. There's some fast-paced fun to be had, the Plus Edition actually includes a 2-player mode, and it certainly has its moments. It isn't as great as some other Pac-Man games, but I can't sit here and tell you that this is a bad one. It's not an overwhelming recommendation, but if you're somebody who enjoys old-school Pac-Man games and you've had enough of Championship Edition DX, maybe this one is worth trying. It's usually dirt cheap anyway. And so here we have Shadow Labyrinth releasing in 2025. This very well might be the weirdest Pac-Man game of them all, and that really is saying something. Like, Pac-Man has truly been all over the place, but this might be the weirdest direction that any of the games have ever gone. So Shadow Labyrinth has such a bizarre premise to it. It takes place in Bandai Namco's United Galaxy Space Force timeline, which hasn't been referenced in years. And for the unfamiliar, it actually connects a bunch of the old Bandai Namco arcade games together. But anyway, the game starts with somebody playing a game on their console, suddenly they vanish, and then they wake up in this prison in the form of a hooded, armless body. They're then greeted by this robot who introduces herself as Puck, who gives you a prosthetic arm and tells you that you need to do exactly what she says, and that's all I'm really going to say for this game's story. One of the best elements of Shadow Labyrinth is actually the story, the world building, and the general intrigue. This is a dark, depressing world that is surprisingly sinister, bleak, and downright edgy, and Pac-Man being here, this having to do anything with Pac-Man actually, is just so surprisingly compelling. The storytelling is actually pretty decent here. The game has a good hook. You want to figure out why Pac-Man is here, why Pac-Man's trying to leave, and what is even happening. Like, genuinely, what the hell is even happening? But the game explains it all to you in due time. It really does take its time showing its hand to you, but I actually think that it's got some good payoffs, and it has a bunch of fan service for older Bandai Namco series that haven't been referenced in years. I won't spoil what gets referenced, but I'll just say there's more than Pac-Man here, and I think it's pretty cool that they tie it into other Bandai Namco series. I could totally see somebody jumping into this though and being just wildly confused, especially if they're a younger gamer and don't remember all of these old arcade series. Either way, I think the story is pretty cool. I think the mystery is well done, and this was really the best element of Shadow Labyrinth. It's why I wanted to continue playing it. I'm not going to act like the storytelling is putting Cyberpunk 2077 on notice, but I actually thought it was pretty cool here. And speaking of cool, we have this game's overall aesthetic, vibe, and mood. It obviously is going for something very different from any other Pac-Man game. Like I mentioned, it's bleak, it's dark, it's oppressive, and it's just incredibly foreboding in really every element. The backgrounds are foreboding, and the music that shows up is kinda sinister, and it goes for this just uneasy feeling. It's not a horror game or scary, it's just more so brooding when it comes to its general atmosphere, and I actually thought this was pretty cool. But let's talk about the moment-to-moment gameplay. So this is a Metroidvania. Yeah, the first time I heard that I was pretty surprised, and it doesn't really matter how many months or years have passed, I'm still pretty surprised with this. This is a Pac-Man Metroidvania, and a rather large one at that. The game takes place entirely from a 2D perspective, and it sees you playing as the creatively named Swordsman number 8. And the core moment-to-moment gameplay sees you exploring around these rather large environments, trying to figure out how you're going to get to the next objective, fighting off enemies, solving basic puzzles, and utilizing your abilities to navigate the environment. Like any other Metroidvania, you'll come across plenty of obstacles that you can't actually get past at first. You'll have to get an ability later, sometimes much later in the game, and then come back. There is a fair amount of backtracking here, but this is all pretty standard for the genre. It's just weird to see it in a Pac-Man game. And speaking of, sometimes you actually get to fuse with Puck when you see certain surfaces that look reminiscent of a very old arcade game, and you actually get to control where you're going to jump and the speed of Puck when you're on these, and it adds a little bit of variety to the overall level design. It mixes things up here and there. Outside of exploring levels and getting abilities, you will get into combat, quite a bit of combat, and the combat in this game is alright. The combat is a bit slower than you might expect. You're no Alucard or Hornet, that's for sure. It's a little slower paced, it's a little bit more methodical, and you actually have stamina to worry about. You can do unlimited basic melee attacks, but using your special or dodging will use up this stamina. If you run out of it, you have to wait for it to come completely back, meaning you're really going to have to manage this. When you start this game, the combat sandbox is pretty small. There's not a lot of things you can do in combat, and you're kind of just mindlessly wailing on enemies. But the further you get in the game, you actually get way more combat abilities. You just get more abilities in general, and it actually begins to open up quite a bit. There's actually way more depth here than you might expect. The combat even begins to speed up a little. You even get the ability to fuse into Gaia, this giant mech that can absolutely wreck enemies. And some bosses. This game has a surprising amount of bosses to it, and while a lot of them certainly aren't winners, there are some really cool bosses here, especially when, I'll just say, certain other franchises are referenced. But I will say the game does hide its better bosses towards the later half of the game. Something else that's saved for later in the game is maze gameplay. Yeah, there are actually points where you get to go into a maze and it's more like traditional Pac-Man. It's actually pretty similar to Pac-Man Championship Edition 2, and I think this is actually really cool. It not only provides a ton of variety, it plays up being, you know, a Pac-Man game, and it's actually just a lot of fun. It controls well too. The game in general actually controls decently well. It does take a little bit of time to get used to the movement since it is a bit slower. You're not zipping all over the place like you will in, say, Silksong, but I can appreciate the game's overall slower speed. Something that I don't appreciate is something that I've alluded to twice now, and that's the game saving its better stuff for the latter half of the game. I'll just be blunt about it, the pacing and length of Shadow Labyrinth is just not very good. The pacing is unbelievably slow. It is so sluggish. It is molasses. It is a fucking snail. It is dial-up internet slow, and this game is surprisingly gargantuan. This is easily one of the biggest Metroidvanias ever made. I don't think anybody ever expected that. This game is well beyond the 15 to 20 hour mark, and 100% it would probably take you well over 30 or 40 hours. Like, this game is actually just massive, and it takes what feels like forever, and it feels like it takes just way too long to become enjoyable. Like I mentioned, when you start the game, it's honestly not that great. You don't have much in the way of combat or abilities. It all feels rather basic. The exploration is serviceable at best, and there's just not a whole lot you can do. I was more intrigued by the story than the gameplay. The gameplay was just kind of whatever, but as you play through the game, as you unlock more abilities and there's a lot more variety being introduced, the gameplay actually really picks up. It actually does become more enjoyable. You get way more abilities, the bosses are better, the story becomes more intriguing, everything actually opens up, but it takes, in my opinion, just way too long to get to this point. The game just takes far too long to truly open up and become as enjoyable as it possibly can. And you know, I understand that they want to space out getting all of these abilities and the story and all of that, but you gotta find some kind of balance, because the first few hours of this game are easily the worst few hours of this game, and I wouldn't be surprised if a majority of people play like 2 to 4 hours of this and go, I'm not really digging this, and that's a real shame, because the later half of this game, it really does pick up, and you actually see this game's full potential. I wouldn't be surprised if like 90 or 95% of people do not beat this game. The first few hours feel dreadful in comparison to like the second half of the game, and then the game actually just takes a long time to beat in general, and I know for some people that's a good thing. They want the game to go on and on and on. Well, this is, in my opinion, one of those games that just goes on way too long. There's a reason most Metroidvanias don't go beyond the like 15-hour mark outside of Hollow Knight. It's hard to keep things engaging, exciting, and it's hard to keep the gameplay loops fresh. And this game absolutely shows that it's hard, because it does start to get stale. It does start to get repetitive, and I was getting a bit sick of it. I was just like, dude, how much more is there to this game? Only to find out that it just keeps going and going and going. And speaking of going and going and going way too long, let's wrap things up. In conclusion, Shadow Labyrinth is a decent game. It's not great, but it's not bad either. It's just kind of a mixed bag. It certainly has its moments like the story, the presentation, and parts of the gameplay, but it's bogged down by just horrendous pacing, and it can get pretty repetitive. It also leaves some pretty awful first impressions, and first impressions are just kind of everything nowadays, especially with so many high quality games. If the first few hours scream mid to bad, that's not a good sign. Either way, if you like Pac-Man, if you like Metroidvanias, this one might be worth checking out, but I am a bit cautious about it. There certainly is something here, but I'm certainly not going to go out of my way to recommend this one. I'd actually rather just recommend the secret level episode that started this whole thing. So here we got Pac-Man World Repac, releasing initially in 2022. Now, I played the original Pac-Man World for the PS1 when I was a kid, and absolutely loved it. And I think it's actually aged pretty well even nowadays, but when I saw they were doing a remake, I was pretty surprised. But I was also excited to see what a remake would add to the table, and it meant a whole new generation could experience the majesty that is Pac-Man world. Now when it comes to the story, it's pretty much identical to the original. It's about Pac-Man going on a journey to Ghost Island to go save his family. There's a little bit more to the story here, but it's pretty much the same, and I think it's more than serviceable enough. It's a lighthearted, fun story that gets the job done and doesn't overstay its welcome. The first thing you'll probably notice about this game, since it is a remake, is the presentation. It's actually pretty solid. Look, it's no big budget AAA hyper realistic title, but it's certainly not trying to be either. It is a bit more on the budget side, but I still think it looks nice. It has a nice aesthetic to it, the colors pop, and the game ran pretty smoothly. From a presentation standpoint, I think they did a pretty good job. Surprisingly, they didn't remix or redo the music whatsoever, they just reused what the original game had. It can sound a little fuzzy at times, but man, the soundtrack was always a banger in this game. Like, I love this game's soundtrack. I think for the most part, they nailed the presentation, the vibe, the aesthetic, and the general mood of the game. But when it comes to the gameplay, what really matters, how did they do? I think they actually did a pretty bang up job, to the point where I could never see myself going back to the original game. Yeah, the remake is actually that good. If you couldn't tell, the game is very much a 3D platformer from the late 90s, and it certainly still plays like it. It's not the most complicated by any means, but it's still pretty enjoyable. Pac-Man himself is still full of life, looks pretty goofy, and actually has a pretty decent moveset. He can do this butt bounce where he flies into the air, allowing him to destroy crates and crush enemies. And then he has the rev roll, where he charges up this big burst of speed, allowing him to propel off ramps or activate moving platforms. And the game will absolutely utilize these two abilities to the fullest. Every single level finds some way to utilize both of his abilities, and the game comes up with tons of creative obstacles for these abilities. This remake does actually add an extra move where Pac-Man can do this flutter kick in the air to stay in the air a little longer and get just a bit more distance with his jumps. This feels more like a course correction tool, allowing you to hit those really precise jumps, and I don't think it's a bad addition. I didn't really use it too much, but hey, it's cool that it's there. Something though that has been majorly overhauled from the original game is the controls and the feel. The original game felt fine, but Pac-Man was a bit limited in how many directions he could move, and at times he did feel a bit stiff. That is absolutely not the case here. This remake feels amazing. It feels way better than the original. It's so smooth and fluid and intuitive. It just kind of handles like a dream. I have nothing but good things to say about the feel, the physics, and the controls in general. It makes the game way more enjoyable than I realized. They absolutely nailed it in that sense. They absolutely nailed it when it comes to the level design as well. Not every level is exactly the same. Plenty of areas have been tweaked or switched up, and I think for the most part it was for the better. I'm sure there will be plenty of purists that do prefer the levels of the original version, but I think the remake did a pretty excellent job when it comes to the level design. This has some really solid level design to it, with plenty of unique creative levels, ideas, and challenges that actually do utilize all of the moves that Pac-Man has. And the game very much does play into its Pac-Man roots. The ghosts are all over the place, ready to stop you. They have these cute little costumes. And of course, all of the Pac-Man collectibles you know and love are here as well. The Pac Dots, the fruit, the Galaga ship, and of course everybody's favorite, the Power Pellet, allowing you to turn into Big Pac where you can go eat all of the ghosts. Additionally, you can find the letters that spell out Pac-Man throughout these levels. If you collect all of them, you actually get to go to a maze level where it is more like traditional Pac-Man, and I got nothing but good things to say about this. It's a fun throwback, it adds some variety, and the mazes are actually decently well designed. Oh, and they control nice. And from time to time, some of these levels will actually have keys that Pac-Man needs to find in order to save some of his friends. What I'm trying to say is there are plenty of things to collect, and it's rather enjoyable to do so. It's also really enjoyable to do the butt bounce. It feels so freaking good in this game, and destroying enemies with it feels great. There's actually new enemies in some of these levels, and you know what? They all go down the same. Speaking of new, the boss fights have actually been just totally redone, which I really did not expect, and they're so much better than what the original game had. They're just a straight improvement. This game in general, in my opinion, is a straight improvement. It feels nicer, it plays nicer, it looks nicer, it's just the nicer experience. If you're going to play Pac-Man World at this point, you should probably just play the remake. Obviously, the original game still has its charm, and there's plenty of reasons why you'd want to go back to the original, but between the two, I'd much rather play the remake, and I think it's one of the best Pac-Man games ever made, no hyperbole. This is easily one of the best remakes of the 2020s, and just one of the most underrated games of the 2020s. I totally think it's worth your time. It's usually dirt cheap, and it's a pretty good 3D platformer. While it's not the most innovative, creative, or challenging 3D platformer, it still is a good time, and I totally recommend it. And then we have Pac-Man World 2 Repac. Now, I was excited for a remake of the first game, but when I saw they were remaking Pac-Man World 2, I actually got pretty excited because I love Pac-Man World 2. Pac-Man World 2 is maybe my favorite Pac-Man game of all time. So to see it get the Repac treatment, I was more than excited, and I'm so glad to say that this game absolutely delivers. I do want to give a shout out to Bandai Namco and GameSite for hooking me up with a review code, but trust me, that does not affect my judgment of this game because this game is pretty much peak Pac-Man. The original game was already incredible. This is even better. There's just so many quality of life improvements and additions here that just immediately make this game the definitive way to play Pac-Man World 2. When it comes to the story, it's pretty similar to the original game. It sees the ghost stealing all of the golden fruit, summoning this evil night ghost known as Spooky, and it's up to Pac-Man to go stop him. The story is just as basic as the original, but they actually added voice acting for Pac-Man. They even brought back his Pac-Man World 3 voice actor, which is just a great piece of continuity, and it makes the story that much better. Pac-Man being able to speak this time around makes it a bit more personal, even if all of a sudden he does have a new wife and kids thanks to some legal issues. The story is charming, whimsical, cute, and it's pretty lighthearted for the most part. It doesn't do anything you haven't seen before, but it doesn't try to do that either. It tries to just tell a simple, fun little story, and I think it more than gets the job done. It actually does change things up though, especially in the second half. There's some really neat additions that I don't want to spoil. They're actually that cool. Story, more than good enough. When it comes to the presentation, it looks pretty similar to the first Repac, but I liked how that game looked. It looked very vibrant, alive, charming, and it ran perfectly fine. This game, exactly the same thing. It actually does a really good job at maintaining the original game's aesthetic and art style while bringing it to the modern era. Again, it's not pushing the boundaries of graphics. It is not the next Crysis. It is not the next Cyberpunk. It is not the next Last of Us, but I think it's a nice looking game. Unlike the first Repac, they actually did redo the music here. The music is remixed, and there's some new versions of these tracks, and I think it's pretty great stuff. I love the soundtrack to the original game to pieces. It's so good, and this new version, I think it's all really good too. So many of these tracks are bangers, and so many of them are a nice bop or a nice beep. A lot of them really fucking slap is what I'm trying to say. The music, nothing but great things to say. And I got nothing but good things to say when it comes to the gameplay as well. The controls are smoother than ever. The original game already felt pretty good. This feels excellent. It controls, handles, and feels like a dream. It is just such a joy to control Pac-Man. It's so much fun butt bouncing all over the place or getting a giant burst of energy and speed and flying all over the place. It feels really good. Like the first Repac, his flutter kick returns, but I think I used it even less here. Something different from the original is that you can actually do your little kick flip while you're just standing on the ground. In the original, you had to be in the air to do it. Now you can do it literally anywhere, and it feels just as great as it always has. You can also throw Pac Dots, but I never use this. So all in all, Pac-Man's moveset, it's pretty great here. It's expanded on the original, and it feels just as good, if not better. But what's a good moveset without some great levels? Now, the levels in Pac-Man World 2 were all pretty excellent for the most part, and they're even better here. They flow better, they have, for the most part, better pacing, and there's just so much creativity, originality, and variety. The game does a great job at mixing things up constantly. You'll have maybe 1 or 2 levels, a gimmick or theme, and then the game will mix it up and throw something totally new at you, and it's constantly doing this throughout the entire experience, and everything it introduces is actually pretty good. Sure, nothing it throws in there is particularly original. At times, Pac-Man World 2 has always felt like a hodgepodge of all the greatest 3D platformers, but man, it all really does come together to create such a fun experience. There are so many memorable, amazing levels in this game, like where you're bouncing on these trampolines, or when you're on the roller skates, or when you're in the submarine. Even some of the more low-key levels have plenty of memorable moments. Like the first game, there are plenty of collectibles here, and you actually do get rewarded for collecting all of these collectibles. You'll be rewarded these special figures that you can place all around Pack Village. Every level also has optional missions, and these missions are no joke. They're actually somewhat difficult, but if you're able to complete them, you actually get some costumes for Pac-Man. And I also think this is pretty cool. It adds some replayability. I do wish some of these missions were a bit clearer, but I think this is a net positive overall. Like the first Repac, some of these levels have been tweaked, and I think for the most part it is for the better. The camera angles are different as well, but I still found it to be pretty enjoyable. Something that is totally different from the original is the boss fights. The boss fights are not one-to-one recreations from the original, and some of these are tough. Some of the bosses are going to kick your ass, surprisingly so, but even with them being little difficulty spikes, I still found them to be pretty enjoyable. Something that I did not expect this game to do though, was have a whole nother half to it. Despite my love for Pac-Man World 2, I'll be the first to admit that it's a pretty short game. You can beat it in like 4 or 5 hours. I expected this to be the same since it's just a remake. But no, this game actually does something totally unexpected and different. After you beat the original final boss, you get the second half of the game where they have you go through what is essentially a whole nother game, complete with brand new challenging levels. These levels are no joke. These are easily the hardest levels of any Pac-Man game and will actually test you, and I think this is amazing. They added tons of levels, tons of content, and it's clearly aimed at people who mastered the original, and they didn't just throw this in there as some kind of end game. No, they actually implement the story into this, and it feels for the most part very natural, and it's like we're getting a whole nother Pac-Man World 2, and yeah, I absolutely love this. This game absolutely did not need to do this. They totally could have just remade the original game and nobody would have batted an eye, but they added all these extra levels, an extra fight or two, tons of new music. It just was getting better and better. The game is actually pretty decent when it comes to its length now, taking about double the length of the original. I'm not going to act like all the new levels are as good as the old ones. A lot of them aren't, and some of them are stupidly difficult, but I still found them all to be pretty enjoyable. I just found this game in general to be rather enjoyable. It's like they took one of my favorites from my childhood and made it even better. They did add this 2-player mode, which is really weird and not very good, but hey, that's totally optional. I also like that they really did retain the difficulty from the original game. A number of people always complained about the difficulty, but I welcomed it. I like that the game challenged you, and while this game won't challenge you at first, it eventually does become difficult, and I think it does a really great job at ramping up that difficulty. This game is great. If you're somebody that enjoys 3D platformers, I 100% recommend this game. It is easily the best 3D platformer I've played in 2025 that is not Donkey Kong. And it's immediately one of my favorite video game remakes of all time. They really went above and beyond to knock this one out of the park, and I think it's totally worth checking out. If you've ever been a fan of Pac-Man, 3D platformers, or you're looking for something a little out of the norm, look no further. This game is just a joy to play from start to finish, and it makes me hope that maybe we can get a new Pac-Man world. I mean, I guess they could remake 3, but 3 kind of sucks, so I don't really need to see them remake it. I'd rather see something new. Either way, I'm happy we got this one because it's awesome. Alright, that's it for today's video. I've been rambling for quite a bit, but that's not going to be the code word. The code word today is going to be pack dot. Yeah, that is technically 2 words. I don't give a shit. It's late as hell. It's like 1 in the morning and I got work tomorrow, but I really wanted to knock this video out because I wanted to talk about Pac-Man and there's a bunch of big games coming out. I'm just rambling, so have a good night's sleep, everybody. Get your spicy nuggets. Bye-bye.